where truth and fiction collide. You're listening to John Christie. This is the intersection of Christianity and culture.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back to the John Christie Podcast. I am John Christie. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to share a quick update on some of the happenings. As I mentioned last week, I'm going to be publishing in early 2027, my first debut novel titled Angels. And I've been spending a lot of time primarily over the past year, but this has been going on since 2019. And we've been preparing for the release. Again, the title is Angels. It's a story about control, surrender, and the cost of who you trust. It's told through the lives of two estranged sisters. I hesitate to say main characters because it's a very character-driven story with many cast members to it. But the two sisters are really the focal point, the battle, if you will, between angels, those that are guardians and those that are fallen. And it's about the unseen influences that surround them. The book is currently preparing for the editing process, and as that continues, I've been working on building a better home for the updates, for conversations, for writing that's connected to the book. So I recently redesigned my website, johnchristie.com, and integrated it more closely with my Substack, as well as the podcast, articles, and basically anything on my platform. And this is where I'm sharing my short fictions, reflections, and thoughts around many of the same themes that will show up in Angels. Things having to do with belief, with doubt, with grace, with identity, and ultimately that fragile certainty we often build our lives around. So again, the website is johnchristie.com. There you can get to my Substack as well as these podcasts or any of the podcast outlets through Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc. And there's also now going to be, or is presently, an Angels Update section on the website where you can stay connected to the book as it moves toward publication, so you don't have to wait and hopefully see something on Facebook or miss it or not, but you can actually subscribe. And in doing so, the subscriber will include a chance to be considered for an advanced copy before the release. We will be doing an advanced reader copy program, and in that you'd be able to receive a copy before the release itself. You'll get a notification when Angels becomes available for pre-order, and any major announcements about the release itself, the timeline of Angels, as we go through the process, and then even afterwards, if you wish to continue on that, having updates of whether it's book club appearances or any book signings or anything, speaking events or anything to do with that. So if you want to subscribe, you can go to johnchristie.com. You will see a button or a link that says Get Angels Updates. Just click on that, fill out a very short form, and you'll be on the list. So if you've been following the podcast at all over the the years or any of my work that I've done with My Week in Atheism or my writings, you know that much of what I do tends to be centered around this statement, that conversations about faith, doubt, and the questions that shape our lives is what I try to focus toward. And it's that word conversation that really matters to me, because whether it's the book or this podcast, I always continue circling around that theme, that conversations, because I don't do it in a dogmatic way, at least I hope not, but more in a conversational way. And that really seems to be lacking these days more and more. When we did the movie My Week in Atheism, that was a primary topic of discussion between David and I, and just in general, a motivation behind the movie. And it was conversations, right? Not speaking at each other, not fighting, friendly debates, friendly disagreements. Doesn't mean we have to always agree with each other, but we do it with respect. As the Bible tells us, gentleness and respect. And again, that just seems to be missing in a lot of today's efforts. We seem to spend more time talking at each other nowadays and less time talking with each other, listening, articulating, having, again, real conversations, not just memes that we throw out there in sound bites. And I love to explore those questions that are the most influential ones to our daily lives. Those things like, what do we believe? Why do we believe? What happens when faith moves from something personal into something public? And how do we think honestly about the places where conviction, power, culture, and politics begin to overlap? Which, if you got hint by this, brings me to today's guest, Andrew Linn. He's a Christian documentary filmmaker who recently completed a documentary about the separation of church and state. His film explores one of the most complicated and often emotional intersections in American life. That is the relationship between politics and faith. This is a conversation about belief, about public life, Christian conviction, government, freedom, and what happens when spiritual commitments enter that political arena. So, Andrew, are you ready?
Yes, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we start with just give an introduction of yourself, who you are, and bring it into how you came about creating this film.
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Andrew Linn. I'm a documentary film director. This is my second documentary, feature-length documentary. I had been pondering on this idea of making this film for maybe close to 7 years, and just waiting on the Lord, and he kind of finally pushed me to do it. I completed it in October 25, just in time for the 250th anniversary of the United States, which wasn't my goal. I didn't intend that or even think about it, but it's the grace of God. But I went to a Baptist church. That's where I was discipled when I was first saved in my 20s. And I'd heard about Roger Williams and that he was this great Baptist. And so I found him very curious. And as I investigated more about him, I found him to be an unsung hero of America. He's the founder of Rhode Island, and his charter, as far as we know, for his state of Rhode Island, which is basically the Constitution of Rhode Island, is the first, as far as we know, in world history to have freedom of religion in its charter. So I just thought, this would be a neat subject and a very important subject for this time, because the separation of church and state is often misquoted, and it's a very confused topic. And as he said, it's not really a black and white subject. It's kind of a complicated issue. So that's why I kind of wanted to make this.
Very cool. So are you in the New England area?
No, I was born and raised in Maryland, and recently moved to West Virginia.
Okay. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. I've bounced around my entire life. So I was born in Massachusetts, spent some time as a child in Virginia, then back to Massachusetts, then California for a while, now back to Massachusetts, and now I'm in Florida, and I've been all around, but I still have roots. That's really where my primary roots are, in New England. And my daughter actually lives in Rhode Island. That's why I was curious
cool.
about that. So very familiar with Roger Williams and, Roger Williams Park, the zoo, just the whole history behind him. So when I'd heard about this, I was very interested because he doesn't seem to be a name that I hear come up a lot when people want to talk about church and state. Do you agree?
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I never was taught about him in public school where I went, and I only heard about him when I was young because my best friend was actually a direct descendant of him. He's a great grandchild. Yeah. So, but at that time, as a kid, I didn't care. I just thought, I was like, oh, okay, whatever, But as I grew up, I learned to appreciate, who this guy was. I agree 100%. He's separation of church and state comes from him. It wasn't Jefferson. So I think, he should have more prominence in the United States. But
why do you think that is?
Yeah, I get asked that. I don't know. I think, because in part probably it's speculation, but he came 100 and so many years before the Revolution, and those guys are the big dogs. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. They're the all-star team of our country. So I think he got buried underneath them. And I'm sure people. He made a lot of enemies in his time. He was a great politician, but he made enemies. He had friends, and even his enemies respected him. But maybe, I think people didn't like what he was doing at the time. They thought he was a radical for his time. And at that time, state-run religion was just the way it was. And the colonies each had their own state-run religion. And, all the people nobody liked ended up in Rhode Island because they had freedom of religion. So it was, kick the Baptists out, kick the Quakers out, and they can go to Rhode Island. So, I guess the majority of people didn't esteem him highly in what he was doing at that time. And maybe it just kind of carried over the years, whereas until the founding of the country, when we established freedom of religion and First Amendment, then maybe he's gotten more of some recognition. And I will also mention, I don't know if you saw this or noticed this, but last year at the National Prayer Breakfast, President Donald Trump actually talked about Roger Williams, which I thought was cool. Again, because, most people don't ever talk about him, but it was good to hear the president mention him and bring up freedom of religion. So, yeah.
Again, being from that area, I'm familiar with his colony. Would it be? Yeah, because he basically founded Rhode Island, so it was his colony in a sense.
Correct.
So I'm familiar with that history side of it. Let's do this though. I'm going to play the trailer and then give you a moment to talk a little bit more about it, and then we'll just kind of go into some of the topics. Does that sound good?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, here we go.
The most common form of government in world history is kings. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger. And these old pilgrims did a polarity change, a flip. Instead of top down, it's bottom up.
We shall be as a city on a hill. This city on a hill was supposed to be an example to all humanity. And it really was a religious state.
In Europe, persecution was right where you were, and you either believed what the state told you to believe, or you'd be punished for not believing
it. If society is going to work, we need to believe the same thing. And this plays into, what since Constantine was this idea of the marrying together of the civil sphere and the religious sphere. A state-imposed church, a Christendom.
Puritans in New England and most of the other Christians in the world thought that persecution was simply the hard stuff you had to sometimes do to make sure that everybody believed the same thing. Roger Williams believed the hard stuff was too hard, and it was actually persecution, and it was raping the souls of men and women who were forced and coerced to believe something they didn't believe.
He used a phrase that forced worship stinks in God's nostrils. He thought that hypocrisy was awful.
The sword of the state cannot make a man change his mind. He believes what he believes.
You didn't have the freedom without the pain of death. In America, with Roger Williams, you get freedom of conscience, and that's what Roger Williams helped bring to America, the freedom of conscience.
He knew when you mix religion and politics, you get politics. It's that simple.
And history has borne out that his ideas have not only lasted the test of time, but because they have, they kind of serve as a stamp of approval on a man who is deserving of our admiration.
When we understand the ideological underpinnings of the freedoms we have in America, it helps us to preserve these freedoms for the next generation.
Okay. So, again, that was a video trailer, so there were some words overlaid and speakers, voices that have names and titles. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those people we were listening to? Were they just Christian pastors? Were these historians? Who were we going to hear when we watch this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was one pastor in the film. There's the New York Times bestselling author I interviewed. He wrote the preeminent book on Roger Williams. His name's John M. Barry, and his book is Roger Williams and the Creation of the American Soul. So if you ever typed into Google, book about Roger Williams, his would be the first to come up. Like I said, it's like the best-selling book on Roger in today's day and age. I interviewed President Emeritus of Mercy University, not because he was the president of that school, but because he also wrote a book about Roger Williams called Separating Church and State, Roger Williams and Religious Liberty. And then lastly, I interviewed Bill Federer. He's kind of viral online now. He's a prolific speaker. He's a Christian and conservative and a historian. So I kind of got perspective from all different angles, from a theologian, from, the John M. Barry, he's to the left. The President Emeritus is kind of centrist, and then kind of right-winger with Bill Federer. So anyway, I got all these different perspectives, more or less, and it really dives into the history, the facts, and mostly the religious or biblical arguments that Roger Williams made for the separation of church and state or freedom of religion. So he based all these arguments on the Bible for it, which people wouldn't think, but that's how he argued for it.
Give me a couple of those arguments. Some of the most important ones that you know.
Yeah. So the one that's the most profound to me is that he believed that the Ten Commandments, he called them the two tablets that govern their. Well, let me start over. So he believed that there was only one theocracy ever established by God. That was ancient Israel. He didn't believe that any other government in world history following Israel could be theocratic. So he believed that the first table of the Ten Commandments, no civil government since ancient Israel could enforce the first table that deals with people's relationship to God. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me, keep the Sabbath, those things. But the civil government since ancient Israel could enforce the second tablet of the Ten Commandments, the civil laws.
Let me stop you there real quick. Why couldn't any other?
Well, so he believed that, as we are New Covenant Christians in the New Testament, Jesus Christ didn't establish a political kingdom. He established a spiritual kingdom. So he also believed in two kingdoms. There's the spiritual kingdom, the church, those who profess faith in Christ, and there's the worldly, earthly kingdom, or the city of man. So he believed that if you can't force people to go to church on Sunday, so for instance, at that time in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, these are the things they were doing. It was complete control over your life. It was a religious state. So your hair couldn't be long. You had to go to church on Sunday. You couldn't be single. You had to live with family. There was all these rules and regulations. And his point was, you're just making hypocrites. He also didn't believe in oaths. So he just thought at the threat of a sword, you'll say whatever it takes to survive, preserve your life.
That's
so
good.
if you force people to, yeah, if you force people to go to church, that doesn't change their heart. It changes their behavior. Yeah, I'm going to kill you if you don't go to church.
Sure.
But it doesn't. He believed also in the two swords: the sword of the state and the sword of Christ. Which, the sword of Christ, preaching the word of Christ, it'll transform men's hearts. But the sword of the state is there to again do the second tablet to uphold good and protect the good people, innocent people, and punish evil. But it's not meant to convert people. The sword of the state. That's the sword. Only the sword of the spirit can convert people to Christianity. So his big thing was it was hypocritical, and there was a long history in Europe, and it came over here in the colonies as well. This persecution of other Christians for simply disagreeing on matters of theology. So that's kind of where he landed on these things.
That's good. So let's stay there for just a minute, because this sounds very contrary to what a lot of people believe is the Christian reasoning behind having a one nation under God. I'll phrase it that way. What you're describing doesn't sound like what people today, in fairness, on the Christian side as well on the non-Christian side, believe that the purpose is to, in a sense, bring all people to Christ under one banner in the United States. This doesn't sound like what Roger Williams was establishing.
Right. No, he was very much against. Well, it's like I said, it's very. So these people would preach one thing and certain things. He had to make compromises. So the charter does have, for Rhode Island, has freedom of religion in it, right? It's specifically more or less says that nobody in said colony could be molested for differences of opinion on religion, matters of religion, or disquieted, and so forth. But it also says in the charter that the goal, basically, of Rhode Island was to convert Native Americans to the one true God, Jesus Christ. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, but again, it says it was to convert, not forced conversion. He was against forced conversion because the Massachusetts Bay Colony was accused of doing that. They were trying to force convert these Native Americans, and as I mentioned, that's completely against his view. But I would say,
could you? Sorry to interrupt, but could you say then that maybe a more proper word would be to evangelize to Native Americans?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. He learned their language. He tried to write a Bible in their language to convert them to Christianity. So he was, while other people either wanted nothing to do with them or they were trying to force convert them, and it was contentious. Anyway, but yeah, so that was his goal, and so I would say he was seeking he was a Puritan, a pastor, and a politician. And I would say he was seeking to protect religion, not only from the state, but from the world. He came up with this visual, which is basically the separation of church and state, where the church is a garden and it's enclosed and surrounded and protected from the world, and the world is the weeds. And that oftentimes the church was compelled to break a hole in the wall and let the weeds get in. And he didn't just mean the government, but also the world, just anything outside of the church. So he established freedom of religion in the United States when it carried it on to protect sheep, to protect religion, because he himself experienced persecution and banishment from Massachusetts Bay Colony for his differences of views on religion. And this was a long history in the West of this happening. And, he's like, look, that's enough. Enough is enough. This is ridiculous. We can have disagreements and we'll just debate. We don't have to, harm each other or banish each other. We can, discuss these things. So that was his idea.
So let's explore that a little bit more, because nowadays the common usage of the term separation of church and state extends beyond just forcing anyone into a religion, but it extends into prayer in schools. It even extends into whether or not a teacher should wear a cross necklace in the public school, whether students should be allowed to pray for their meal. And again, it's extended beyond just the school board or the principal or the teacher's involvement or forcing the children into people say the children shouldn't even be doing that. Meaning nowadays, the more common understanding, I don't know if it's the more common understanding, but the loudest interpretation of separation of church and state is that anything that is state funded should have zero reference, image, anything to do with anything religious. Is that what separation of church and state means?
So I don't think so. I would say the separation of church and state what it means or what it meant to the founders. It wasn't freedom from religion; it was freedom of religion. So it was the public space was to be you were to be protected your speech, not have your speech banished or your beliefs banished from the public sphere. I don't think that's what the founders intended. I don't think they wanted to get rid of God and religion from the public square. God is mentioned in our founding documents. Does it specifically say Christ? No, but the first thing that Congress did after ratifying the First Amendment, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, they commissioned President George Washington to have a national day of prayer and thanksgiving.
That's
so
right.
modern interpretation would say, hey, that's a violation of the separation of church and state. Well, the founders, the ones who wrote it, they didn't see it that way. We have chaplains in Congress. We have prayers in Congress. So it's not to banish religion. And it seems to be targeted at this idea where, the left has adopted the idea of the separation of church and state to mean some atheistic idea, like freedom from religion. And that's what they think it means. But that's not what it means, because that's not the way it was interpreted for years for, the majority of our country's history. It's clear that people could pray in public. Statesmen could pray. Majority of the statesmen who founded the colonies were also pastors.
Yeah.
And the majority of the colonies were, like I said, religious states. And even after becoming states, the United States of America, you still needed a profession of faith to run for office in these states. So, this is, it was basically the separation of church and state meant no federal denomination would rule the country, be married to the state. And then also your taxes wouldn't go to a church that you didn't affiliate with, because that's what was going on. If you lived in Congregationalist Connecticut and you were a Danbury Baptist, your taxes would go to the Puritan church, Congregationalist church. And, that would offend somebody if you're not a Puritan Congregationalist. And so you're going to say, hey, Thomas Jefferson, is our rights don't feel guaranteed here as the Constitution states. It feels like we have them as a privilege rather than a right. Is everything going to work out here? And that's when Thomas Jefferson writes back and brings up the separation of church and state that everybody talks about. But it was just to make sure that their rights were secured. So freedom of religion. It wasn't freedom from would have been allowing the Congregationalist Puritan government of Connecticut to say, you guys can't practice your faith the way you do. You have to baptize, babies. You have to do this and that. And, so you can't have your religion. You have to have our religion, kind of thing.
Yeah. And, the way I see a lot of these issues as they come up, and, you'd mentioned freedom from religion. There's the organization Freedom from Religion, that this is, one of their primary goals is to eradicate all sense of religion from the public sector. And they try to do that by, in my opinion, overreaching on this idea of separation of church and state, again, down to the smallest details of what they try to remove from public schools or anywhere, again, that's taxpayer funded. But what you said was very interesting, because the issues the founding fathers were dealing with in separating church and state are almost, they are completely different than the modern issues we bring up for church and state. And it's as if the original church and state separation was so successful, we don't even know those exist anymore. To your point, paying taxes that would go to a church and it was not your denomination. That doesn't even exist nowadays. Like, that is such a foreign concept to anyone. Separation of church and state was successful in eradicating that. What they never addressed was whether before students began their daily lessons, they would pray. In fact, we know from historical writings, autobiographies, different stories and stuff that especially once public school was established, daily prayer was very common. So it seems to me like the closer we are in the timeline to the original establishment of church and state, there were precise issues they were referencing that have all but vanished from our society. And now we're bringing in all these new ones that were never intended. And we know they were never intended because we can see the way they lived their lives in those days. Like you said, congressional prayer. Prayer was almost before all major meetings. If you've ever been to the monuments in Washington and you read the inscriptions on the Jefferson Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, etc., just throughout almost all the buildings, you can't avoid scripture. And when I say that, I mean the New Testament primarily, but Old and New Testament writings. It's all over the place. Like, these guys were not trying to hide from Judeo-Christianity. They believed it, and they were proud of it, and they incorporated it into their legislation and their decision-making without forcing the belief of Christ on people.
Right. Exactly.
So that brings me to another question I'd like to ask you. And I'm asking it as a loaded question, so that's why I'm pausing. Are we a Christian nation?
Yeah. So it depends what metric you're looking at. If you look at population, well, then yes, majority people in the United States identify as Christian, 60% or so. At the time of the founding, I'd say that was 80-90% of people who came here were Christian, fleeing Christian persecution. Would we say Japan is a Buddhist country? I think we would, because 90 or so percent of them identify as Buddhist. Is their government a Buddhist government? No, it's not a theocracy. We are not a theocracy, and we shouldn't be, but we are foundationally Christian, and that's just a fact. I mean, just as you mentioned, the founders, I mean, even the deists, so they didn't want freedom from religion. They didn't want to get rid of God and religion. The deists, Benjamin Franklin said, if men be so evil with religion, what would they be without it? The founding fathers were appalled by the French Revolution, which was an atheistic revolution. They wanted to get rid of God from government, God out of their public life. And it was a massacre. It was bloody. And the founders had many quotes. You can look up Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, about a country free of religion. What would their moral foundation be to be a society? And of course, famously, John Adams said the Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is unjust for any other kind, or unsuited. I forget the exact wording, but the point is, these people wanted religion. They knew that is where people get their morals from. Their charity, the charity largely came from the church. That's the idea, that the church would be the charity organization of the country, not the government necessarily. And not against social welfare or anything like that, but I'm just saying, and so, yeah, I believe we're foundationally Christian. We're not a theocracy. We shouldn't be, but that it's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. And there's reasons our laws, all cultures' laws are based on a culture's beliefs. So if you go to the Middle East, polygamy is legal. What we would consider pedophilia is legal, There's reasons we don't have those laws here. We have laws against those because they're based on the Bible, which the Western world is based on. Our morals are based on the Bible, whether they're Christian, whether you identify as Christian or not. That's where we get our morals, among others. No cannibalism. There's societies that have cannibalism. They're kind of getting eradicated mostly, but the Mayans who lived here in the Americas, human sacrifice, and so I would say that we are a Christian nation, but we're not a theocracy, based on, that's basically what I would say.
Okay. That's fair and good. Now let me extend that question. Were we founded as a Christian nation?
Um, with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, you mean, or before that, when the people
I
came
don't
here
want
and
to lead
established
you.
the colony? Okay, all right.
I just want to ask the
Well,
question. And the reason why is because this is hotly debated where people have one, it depends on your interpretation of what that means, which is, I think, what you're getting at. So answer it
Yeah.
how you would. Let me do it this way. Let me play devil's advocate. So we have John Adams in the Treaty of Tripoli making the explicit statement that the United States of America was not founded as a Christian nation.
Right.
What do you do with that?
Yeah, so the founders, there was many different quotes, and I believe that was political at the time to, because of the war with the Muslims. They didn't want this to be seen as a theocratic war, of, religions, right? But let's just take it at face value. Let's say that's, it's in writing. That's literally what he meant. And that can be his opinion, but there's plenty of other founders who did say we were a Christian nation. Some other ones, so for instance, Patrick Henry said, it cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists, but by Christians. John Jay said, Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. Benjamin Franklin said, God governs in the affairs of men. That's a little less Christian, but anyway, so the point is, we are not, again, a theocracy. We are not a theocracy. If we base it, it depends on the metric. Majority of the people at that time were Christian. And politicians are politicians, whether they claim to be Christian or not. Majority of politicians, if not all of them, particularly those running for president, they always have to say their statement if I'm a Christian. Mitt Romney was a Mormon, but that's rare. We had a few Catholics, but politicians are politicians. So at that time, you say what you need to say in certain situations to get ahead, or for, in a war, you got to be careful. But I just think we're foundationally Christian. That doesn't mean every single soul in this country is Christian, or that we're not a theocracy. It just means that our laws and our culture are based on the Bible from a Judeo-Christian perspective. And people, because of freedom of speech, because of freedom of conscience and religion, people can say and feel however they want on the subject. But I just think if we're honest about the history, these men were very public about their faith, and it was, again, it was just part of the culture, and majority of people at that time in this nation were Christian. So that's what I mean by foundationally Christian. I don't mean that we have a Christian government necessarily, but again, I do believe our laws and our ideas come from Christianity, and again, freedom of religion came from a Puritan man. It didn't come from, you think that it come from an atheist or an agnostic or a deist, but it came from a Puritan man, Roger Williams. And, in different cultures, you can't have freedom of religion. It's in a Muslim country, that's a theocratic, you can't separate the church or the mosque from the state. They're married. It's, you have a caliph and a caliphate, and the Sharia law. You can't really have, and there's been instances of that. Where you can live in peace in a Muslim country in the Ottoman Empire. Even Roger Williams' brother was traveling in the Ottoman Empire and said that he found more peace as a Christian there than he did in all of Europe. So, But either way, I just think freedom of religion is a Christian idea because we believe in freedom of conscience. We believe that in the Bible, is in the Bible, and Christ didn't establish a political kingdom, but a spiritual one. And because of freedom of religion, the church has grown and expounded. We've sent out more Bibles and sent out more missionaries, and been the most charitable nation in the history of the world, I believe, because of freedom of religion and not state-run religion.
Yeah. And, back to the Treaty of Tripoli, what strikes me interesting about that is that John Adams would make that statement because it is a trade document. It's a political document, right? And
right.
He is trying to assure them, the Muslims, that they are not going to come in there and force Christianity on them. The way that it leads me to believe, the unspoken thing is, the reason it's mentioned is because somewhere in the conversation there was, hey, we don't need you Christians coming to our country and trying to force us into Christianity the way you, in a sense, have America. In other words, they saw America as a Christian nation. That's what their concern was. And so John Adams is addressing that and saying, look, we were not founded as a Christian nation. He could have went on to say, yes, we are primarily Christian, but we believe in the freedom of religion to be whatever religion you want to be. And that's the real understated comment of the Treaty of Tripoli, because otherwise there is absolutely no need. If we were truly founded as a agnostic, let's not even say atheistic, but just an agnostic nation, that it was no perspective of God, as many atheists like to propose, that there was no establishment of any religious anything, then these people would have had a different perspective of America. But they didn't. They saw us as a Christian nation. And as a result, John Adams had to ease their fear that we are not going to force our Christian beliefs on you. We were not founded as a Christian nation. We are a nation of Christians. And so that's why when people ask that question or make that statement, we were not founded as a Christian nation, what they extend it to is not just that the proper statement would be, we were not founded as a nation that demands or requires you to be Christian. That I absolutely agree with. But we were founded as a nation by Christians, as well as deists, but Christians primarily. And I think history shows that to us. Just again, to your point, by the writings, yes, there were some like Franklin, Jefferson that were deists, but there were many, many more that were explicitly Christian, and you see it in their writings. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think they knew about the Crusades and stuff. They wanted to make sure that, John Adams wanted to make sure this is not a religious war. And also they came out of England where the king was the head of the church. And, and so that was basically a theocracy. So, they wanted to make sure, like, look, we're not a theocracy. We're not a Christian run or church run government, So again, it was political, I believe. But, like you're saying, I agree with you. We're not here to, go to blows over religion. You captured our people. So we're fighting for political means, not for religious means.
Yep.
Kind of thing.
And these are the things, the men in your documentary, as well as you, that have been expressing of what a religious state looks like, what a state imposed religion would look like. And that's what these people were, in a sense, rebelling against. They did not reestablish that. They were rebelling against it and were trying to guarantee a new nation with new rules. Otherwise, why leave the Church of England? Because it's doing exactly what we were trying to do here anyway, right? No, they weren't trying to do that. They were trying to create something different than what they had in England.
Right. Yeah, and Islam is a great thing to compare Christianity to. Like, I mean, you could say, people might find this offensive, but that Puritan-run Massachusetts Bay Colony was akin to Islam. Was it as brutal, as harsh as a Muslim theocracy? Maybe not. I mean, they didn't do a lot of capital punishment, but they were cutting people's ears off, whipping people for things like I had mentioned before. How long your hair was, if you were proud. If they didn't approve of your marriage, they'd kick you out. There's a lot of things where they had absolute control of your life, and so that's a theocracy. And so if we look to Islam as Christians, we can see what not to be like. So for me as a Christian, and all Christians, is that this whole freedom from religion, it's mainly focused on Christianity. It's Christians, get out of here. It's not, Mayor Mamdani just prayed in after he was elected, he prayed in the public office of the mayor. I didn't see any leftists complaining about that. Oh, separation of church and state. He can't pray there.
Right.
But if it was the opposite, you'd hear an outcry.
Yeah, the Freedom from Religion group didn't send him a letter demanding that he no longer does that. Yeah, which they've done to plenty of politicians.
Yes, exactly. So it's so back to a great, it's good to have comparisons on the negative and the positive. We can look to Islam as I think these were well-meaning people, the Puritans in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but I think Roger Williams had it right, and I think that's the best way to go. I think, and his arguments are very brilliant, and and that he's like the first American, first true American, because his ideas were truly what is the foundation of our country, our identity. He even named his daughter Freeborn when he was banished. They gave birth to his daughter, his wife, and they named her Freeborn because and that's freedom. That's what America's all about. So.
And one of the interesting things I was thinking as you were talking about Massachusetts is, a lot of this cult, I'll call it, behavior that Massachusetts was living under culminated in the Salem witch trials. I mean, yes, there was accusations of witchcraft, but less of a holy versus evil battle. It was a complete manipulation of power and control. And even if you just look at, the way things were handled, spirituality aside in it, it was purely what you're describing of a state-run trial, jury, evidence, even witness. It was not anything of what a free state should have under any level of accusations and judge and jury, which again is why we pushed for these things and we solved them. It's no longer an issue. It reminds me, in a sense, when I read Karl Marx's manifesto, I kind of put the book down thinking, well, this is irrelevant because all of this has been addressed and dealt with. Like, we no longer have these children working in, these slave camps without pay at the ages of 5 and 6 and 7, 12 even. We no longer have this oppression over these women of, like, all the things that Marx rebelled against. I look at and say, well, in America, they don't exist anymore. And they were defeated not through Marxism or socialism. They were defeated through capitalism, through a capitalist society, I should say. And so Marx is really, anybody that reads his Communist Manifesto and thinks they're gaining something from it, you really have to look at what his actual arguments are and point to where they exist in modern American society. They don't. And that's very similar to what I feel about the separation of church and state, is when you really want to pick on that, you have to look at it and say, where are those things, to your point, that taxes and funding of churches and things that people are forced under certain states to be a part of a religion? Tell me where that exists. It doesn't exist anymore. We have solved it through our separation of church and state. That doesn't mean we have to extend it to a teacher can't wear a cross necklace to school. That's absurd.
Right.
And
that violates freedom of speech
exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. Going into this project, were there things that you had in mind that you either thought you understood or saw a certain way, and then by the end of it had changed? What did you learn from this project?
Yeah, so, I came, people would like to say they are unbiased about anything or do projects unbiased. I have my bias, and I wanted to, put it in a certain direction to make a point, as all people do. We all have biases. But a few things I learned, nothing that majorly changed my mind or anything, but maybe changed my mind a little bit about Roger Williams. Overall, I think he's a great man. You don't agree with anybody more than 80, 90%, but I do agree with him like 80, 90%. I think he's fantastic, but only Jesus I agree 100% with, right? Because he's God and these are men. But towards the end of his life, Roger Williams, like I said earlier, he didn't believe in oaths, which I don't necessarily agree with. I understand his argument for it, but I didn't fully agree with that. And then his religion. So, like I said earlier, I was discipled in a Baptist church, and Baptists think he's this great Baptist. He originally was a Puritan. He became a Baptist briefly. He co-founded the First Baptist Church in the Americas, but he was very briefly a Baptist, and then he went on to become what's called a seeker. So he died as a seeker, he's still a Christian, but he was seeking the true faith. The pastor in the film said he was a little too Puritan for the Puritans. So I think his courage and his strength maybe led to some self-righteousness towards the end. He didn't believe that the church could baptize anybody because it all ended with the apostleship when the Catholic Church began, and there was no succession of apostleship, so therefore nobody was qualified to baptize. So he kind of got a little wonky in his beliefs, I think, towards the end, and but overall, great man. And when he was needed and young, and he was courageous and did an amazing thing. And so, but that kind of shocked me a little bit when I read about that or learned about that. I didn't know that, But other than that, I think overall. And then there was just one other thing. History is blurry, and people have different opinions or different views. And so one of my interviewees said that the Massachusetts Bay Colony was not forced converting Native Americans, and another guy said they absolutely were. So, that's where you kind of got to just take one side or the other on that one.
Sure. as with most historical events, right?
Right, yes.
So,
and
go ahead.
Oh, and I just wanted to mention back to what you were saying before, that about the Salem witch trials. I just think that's true. I agree with you 100%. But religion isn't just for Christians or Muslims or whoever. The left, they have their own form of religion that they push on kids through the public school, and they promote things that most people are against, LGBTQ stuff and all that kind of thing. And to me, it's funny. They're the ones who always bring up the Salem witch trials, and they're largely become the same thing that they're attacking us for, where they slaughter people like Charlie Kirk, or and even within their own ranks, if you don't agree 100% on like every detail of what they believe or think, you're ostracized, you're canceled, you're banned, banished. So that they've kind of become their own Massachusetts Bay Colony, on the left, where they're just they don't really believe in freedom of religion and freedom in general. It's just like they want to make us conform into bricks, strip us of our individualism, and whereas God works with stones, he builds with stones. They want to, like Karl Marx, strip people, make them into bricks and build with that,
So let me ask you a couple questions down that direction, to be controversial and again, play devil's advocate here. So one of the common things, and this is becoming more common amongst the church even, with progressive Christianity, is, who are you to judge? Don't judge. Jesus said, do not judge. So who are you to pass judgment on these lifestyles, these things? And as far as it has to do with our schools and stuff, we are trying to make people less judgmental towards trans, LGBTQ plus society. So Jesus says, do not judge. Shouldn't you stay out of it then?
Yeah, so that's common, that's the big thing in modern Western Christianity, judge not. If you read the whole passage, what Jesus means is don't judge hypocritically. If you have a log in your eye, don't take the splinter out of your brother's eye, right? So his point was, do not judge hypocritically. And Jesus also said, judge righteously. So people like to take little portion. Everybody likes to tell Christians what Christ meant and what Christ's teachings were when they've never read the Bible and they know a few phrases. But so, yeah, I mean, we make judgments all the time to say, hey, judge not. When you judge something, it's a judgment. It's impossible to live a life without making judgments and having discernment. And, so in Christians, we have a right. The whole point of that argument is to silence Christians and make us cower and go into our corner and, okay, I'm sorry, you're right. Jesus said judge not. But the reality is we all practice out our faith and beliefs, whether it's Christianity, atheism, agnosticism. And so, we as Christians need to express our faith and fight the good fight and, push back on what we consider evil and what God considers evil and uphold what is right, uphold righteousness. And yeah, so we are allowed to judge righteously because we have taken prayer out of school. We have stepped back as Christians from the public square, and they have filled that vacuum, the left, and pushed all their stuff on kids and people. And so we have the right to say, you know what? No, we stepped out. You guys got to step out with your beliefs because your beliefs are incoherent. A man can't become a woman, and a woman can't become a man. That's just not reality, and that's not true. So, and that we got to fight for truth and push back on lies and evil.
And I know when we think of these things, one of the things about the judging is, they'll say, as long as nobody is being harmed, right? If someone isn't being harmed, which I think to that point, a lot of these teachings and things that are being infiltrated from the extreme liberal left side of politics are starting to prove harm, both psychologically as well as physically to people. I mean, when we, go through hormones, replacement therapy, or castration on young children, that while it may have been their decision, should not be making that decision at such a young age, they are causing irreparable damage and harm. So I think it does become something that we need to start judging more critically and doing it again with gentleness, grace, respect, but absolutely needs to be on the table of discussion. I think that's where, in my opinion, that's where the darkness thrives, is in the corners, the hidden areas where no one will talk about them.
Yeah, right. And, it's just funny that they think that Africans and Americans in our country, adults, aren't able to get driver's license in our country, but kids can decide their gender. Yeah. I mean, this is just insanity. Yeah. And so we have to push back. Otherwise, we'll lose our society and our culture and our nation because it's insanity. But, people by and large don't buy into this, whether they're Christian or not. Most people are like, well, this is a little too far. Yeah. I think you guys have gotten a little wacky here. So, and it is religious, the way they treat it. And they're using taxpayer money to push their ideology on kids. And like I said, we've withdrawn, Yep. We have one nation under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. That's it. But there's no more prayer in school. There's, all this stuff. So.
And, I've often made this reference and gotten in trouble for it with people, but you can't convince me that there isn't a slippery slope that we're going down now, to the point where if we're giving young children, full autonomy of their lives, then we have to then make allowances for what we currently deem as pedophilia. Because who would we then be able to say to a 12-year-old child, you cannot be in love with a 54-year-old man? Right. They're allowed to make that distinction. They can make that choice and pursue it if they believe it. And that is no longer considered pedophilia. I mean, you can just, it's not just the natural progression. It's a logical progression. If you're saying children have the right to make these decisions and love is love, who are you to say the love between a 12-year-old child and a 50-year-old adult is not consensual, is not a beautiful thing of love? Right now, people will cringe at it, but I guarantee you, probably less than 10 years, it won't be so cringy. You'll actually start seeing it becoming more of a thing in society. That's my prophecy, but we'll see.
Yeah, right.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm a false prophet.
Well, and then back to who are we to judge, right?
Right, exactly. So who are you to judge about that?
Who are we to judge? We can judge the Bastards Bay County for 14 witches being murdered, but the Mayans who slaughtered thousands in a day, who are we to judge? Right. They had a great culture. Right. So, yeah.
And, we did judge at one point, one of the most significant times in American history that led to a civil war, that we judged things were being done improperly and harmful and wrong to a certain population. And we went after states that supported slavery and wanted it abolished. And that was righteous judgment. So this idea of who are we to judge really needs to be looked at in a much deeper way, because once you make everything permissible, then anything is permissible and you have to put up with it, which is no society anyone wants to live in.
Right.
So,
and I'll just say real quick that these founders who believed in freedom, they were not anarchists. Freedom doesn't mean anarchy. They were all believed in authority. They believed in limited government, but they believed in authority, and they didn't believe in chaos and anarchy. So I'll just say that in reference to what you were saying.
Yeah, that's interesting. Why did you go back to make that comment?
Because you were saying that if we permit this for the sake of freedom or judge not, we permit this, then what else are we going to permit? It's just going to become anarchy. And that wasn't the idea of freedom. The idea of freedom wasn't, because that's the big thing of America identity, right? That's all we talk about is freedom. Well, it wasn't freedom to do whatever you want to do. It wasn't Satanism, do what thou wilt. It was freedom to do the right thing, as John Adams pointed out with that quote I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If we can't control ourselves, then we will need an external government to control us, where the National Guard comes in and, if we're chaotic and rioting and burning down buildings, because we have no internal self-control, because we're not religious or moral, as John Adams said, then you're going to need an external force to, shut it down and so forth.
So when we talk like this, it sounds a lot like Christian nationalism. Is that a useful term, or has that become too politicized? What do you think of that term?
So I thought I was a Christian nationalist. I'm a Christian and I love my country. I thought, that's what it is, good. Right? Christian nationalism. But turns out that's not what it means, apparently. There's a small but growing segment in X and social media of what I call or people call woke right. The woke right that is calling for Christian nationalism. And what that means to them is a Christian prince, a theocracy. They believe, over the last, since the 60s revolution, prayer coming out of school, things have been chaotic. And I would agree, we're on a moral decline as a nation. And they believe the solution to that is to return to a theocracy. That's in part the reason I made this film, was a response to that, that freedom of religion actually protects religion and is good. It's not, we've had issues because of cultural Marxism in our society. We're under attack. But, Christian nationalism in terms of a theocracy, no. We should not be a theocracy in any way, because we've, tested that throughout time and it didn't go well. So
that's great. I love that you contextualized that and said, part of your reason for making this that's so important to emphasize was, in a sense, to combat that Christian nationalist mentality that, no, we are not. The beauty of freedom of religion is to not enforce that on anyone. I want to go down that path a little bit more, but first I want to ask you about that. What did you call it? The woke right Christian nationalist group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How big is that? Because I'm hearing this and I don't see it anywhere. I mean, I see it online from comments and stuff, but I know zero people that even hear some of those thoughts and think that's a good thing. And I'm predominantly, my circle of people is probably predominantly Christian. Yeah, so it's a small but growing sect, and it's largely on X. It's largely in the Reformed circles, Reformed Baptists, Presbyterians, things like that. But there's also Catholics and conservative Catholics and conservative Orthodox Christians. There's a gentleman, the most famous guy probably, Tucker Carlson's actually part of this. He's more subversive. He's not very, I've heard him accused as that, but I've not heard something from him explicitly yet. Explicitly, yeah. So I read this article. It's very fascinating. I'll send it to you. It's it was about Catholic integralism, where that there's woke right is trying to return again to a theocracy through conservative Catholicism or the Orthodox Church, and they believe that's the true church and it should be married to the state, and so forth and so on. And people that push it are people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson. The most famous
I mean, he's not as famous as those people, but his name's Andrew Wilson, I believe is his name.
Yep.
I think it's his name, Andrew Wilson. He's big on, Christian nationalism. And
let me interrupt again there because so I recently, like in the last 2 months or something, heard him on the podcast Trigonometry. I don't know if you've ever heard that one.
Mm-hmm.
And and I was listening to him, and they were asking him about that being a Christian nationalist. And again, hearing him define what he thinks, I'm thinking I agree with 90% of what this man's saying. And I don't know if it's just that last 10% that maybe I go, you might be pushing it too far. But, for him to be asked, in a sense, do you want everyone in America to be Christian? Absolutely yes, would be his response. Well, that would be my response. But that's not the question. The question is, do you want to force everyone in America to be a Christian? That's a totally different. Of course I want everyone in the world to be a Christian. That's a totally different question or dynamic than being forced to. So that's why I brought that up, because it's interesting. These people, I keep hearing the names and the accusations, and I'm thinking, what am I missing? Where? And I don't know if it's being overblown or if there is a legitimate, something there.
Yeah, there is. And I agree. With Andrew Wilson, I saw that same interview, and like you said, I could agree with a lot of what he said. But so he's Orthodox Christian. It's largely from, like I said, the Reformed communities, Orthodox Catholic, conservative Orthodox Catholic, and if you dive deeper into some of this stuff, and how Jesus says, if you have hate in your heart towards your brother, you've committed murder. Well, he definitely hates other denominations of Christians. He believes that the Orthodox Church is the one true church, and he's more concerned with debating other Christians about that than he is about, he even sided with Muslims against Christians, evangelical Christians, to attack them. And so if his, idea of Christian nationalism were to come to fruition, and he had his state-run Orthodox Church, ruling the country, I think we'd all be in big trouble if we weren't Orthodox. But they just, what I've heard said, and I thought this was good, is that the woke left, they destroy statues. The woke right destroys our history. They say we're the bad guys in history. Basically, and we should turn our backs on Israel. They're evil. And so, Iran's actually the good guy in this situation. Tucker kind of said recently, and Candace Owens said that Russia is, the trajectory that we should follow as the United States. The model is Russia, because they're, the state is regathering together with the Orthodox Church and kind of married together and, helping society to be better. And so, they have these little nuggets that you can find that come out. And it's just, they're trying to reframe, destroy our identity, our foundation, say freedom of religion doesn't work, freedom of speech is bad, we got to, because of all the chaos. And I get the idea, we see the chaos, we see the stuff going on. Yeah, we got to address it, but become a theocracy, it's not going to fix that. That isn't the solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm. So one of the gray areas that becomes more difficult in this is, should Christian morality influence law? Where's the line between that? Because it's one thing to say, should we have prayer in school? But then we start stepping into, again, that judgment thing, but now we have to judge according to a base set of morals. And my morals may be very different than the other person's. How do we deal with that? Christian morality and law.
As I said earlier, I believe our laws are based on Christian morality, and I even think Western atheist morality is based on the Bible. They take Christ's teachings and don't acknowledge Christ. But I would say, that's what we're in at right now, where we don't have a large, it's 60%, I think, people, Pew Research, identify as Christian now, so it's waning, the amount of Christians. So what Roger Williams did, Quakers came to Rhode Island, and he hated Quakers. So he was put to the test pretty quickly about this freedom of religion thing. But he held to his beliefs, and what he would do is he would like Charlie Kirk, he would row for 4 hours on a canoe and debate Quakers. He never banished them. He never whipped them. He never had them banished or anything like that. So, we got to fight for what we believe in, in a civil way. But yeah, we just got to, as Christians, you can't separate your beliefs from who you are and what you are going to vote for, or, candidates you like, or what you think should be going on in your communities and so forth. So I think, it's just inevitable. Everybody else gets to have their say, what they believe they're going to push very hard, to be in schools or in public sphere. And so Paul debated people, right? In the book of Acts, he would debate people in the public square. And that's kind of, and that's how you win people to Christ, through our words, through our speech, convincing, debating, discussing things and that. So I think, and that's where, in all our universities were Christian, founded, as Christian universities, not anymore, but, so they've won out there, but we can win them back and so forth, but it's a process, and we got to just, do our part as Christians. And by the way, and Jesus, and we can't keep our faith private. My pastor told me that when I was a new believer in Jesus, and he's right. Jesus, that's like our biggest command is to preach the gospel, and so we got to go out and we can't just sit on our hands or whatever.
So then, how, or better yet, can we distinguish between voting our conscience and imposing our theology, or are they one and the same?
Yeah, I think, they're one and the same. It'd be, you can't really separate that because, now, yeah, and if you're like Roger Williams or, if you really believe in, you can't, as Christians, again, we believe in freedom of religion and we don't want to persecute people. We carry a cross is what we're commanded to do. We're not commanded to put people on crosses.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a superior, yeah.
So if we're in a society in the American culture where it's predominantly Christian, I know that's a range, and there's a wide spectrum of what Christian is, but it's predominantly Christian. We now have most of society voting according to a set of theological morals, or morals derived from their theology. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to align, right? Again, you can have like the left side of Christianity, more progressive side, all the way to the right side. But you're going to end up with, in a sense, Christians voting their moral conscience when they go to the ballot box, whether that has to do with abortion or anything. So I don't see this. To me, that's the ultimate expression of your freedom, is that you're allowed to express yourself in voting that way, not to remove your God from the equation, because there's many Christians that are on the left that would vote differently than a more conservative Christian would vote. And likewise, there's Muslims that would maybe align more on certain things with the conservative right of Christianity than they would with the left. And there's Baha'i or someone else, Buddhist, that might align more with the left than the right. So I see it as it's everywhere. It's, to your point, it's indistinguishable. You can't separate the two, and everyone is going to do it. Which is why I think the conversations are so important, because we need to have these conversations and address these issues, and in doing so, judge in a way that deemed of righteousness, and that doesn't mean to judge a certain way, but to judge according to righteous decision making, not to judge out of hatred, not to judge out of condemnation, but to discern, to gather information and make a judgment on something. And that's what we do when we go to the voter's box. We're judging. And, we need to have these conversations more and more so that we can do that. Unfortunately, it does seem like today, people are trying to shut those conversations down, and even to the point of killing people over it. Assassination, labeled as hate speech. They're conversations, they're definitely conversations. I still believe in sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, you know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, couple more questions I want to circle around with you. Who did you most want to challenge with this documentary? Was it Christians, skeptics, all the above, political conservative, political liberals? Who did you want?
I don't know if I could say that I was seeking to challenge anybody. I wanted to show the history and the facts behind what it really meant. And initially my idea was my target audience is Christians, conservatives, and again, I made it in response to the woke right and this idea of Christian nationalism, which is really Christian theocracy. So I guess it would be to challenge them, but I really wanted to give people, the facts, the truth, the history, because this has become such a muddy, confused topic where, it's presented as though, it's separation of church and state, no gods, no religion, and Christians need to keep silent in public. And so I just wanted to address that and, make sure that, equip people with the arguments and the facts and and Roger and bring up Roger Williams. Like I said, he's an unsung hero, and he needs his due. He was, very integral man in American history that a lot of people don't know about.
That's good. So then let's separate the groups for a moment, and I'd ask, what do you hope Christians will take away from the film?
I guess, and now there is if you brought a friend or had a friend watch it with you that wasn't a Christian, there is a little, you could see sort of the gospel in there, in some degree, but yeah, I guess just, that this is a Christian idea, freedom of religion, and the point is to protect sheep from wolves. And people who ascend to power largely aren't the best people, people who have aspirations of being in power. And they usually, even particularly in a Christian, society or religious state, they're going to persecute sheep, just because they disagree about baptism or they disagree about the Eucharist or whatever. It's like we don't want that. That's just horrible that we would kill our brothers and sisters who claim the name of Christ over stupid, disagreements. That at the end of the day, it's as long as we agree on the main stuff. There's some things we can disagree on and not have to, hate or kill each other. And again, just the big argument of, we as Christians should carry a cross, not put people on crosses. And the subject of don't judge, I don't mean, Christians can't be judges, of course, like literal judges in a court of law. I'm not saying anything like that, or that they can't be statesmen. And it's just that, we shouldn't be slaughtering each other for things that, when you banish somebody for being too proud, that's a spiritual judgment. And that's, and things like that, kind of first tablet stuff, spiritual things, I don't think who's to say the guy who decides that, the governor of the state of Massachusetts or whatever, is, a spiritually good person, or maybe he's a wolf in a sheep's clothing. And, so we just got to be careful. Power corrupts absolutely, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so we just want to stay away from wolves in sheep's clothing. And I think theocracies, allow a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing to take over and run things and persecute innocent sheep.
So if I were to bring or recommend this to a skeptic or non-religious friend, what do you hope they would take away from the film?
So the fact that it is freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, and that these, and hopefully they'd see the gospel presented in a certain degree. Again, it's not very explicit, but it's kind of there subliminally, maybe. So maybe that as well.
That's good. So where can people watch the film and learn more about your work?
So if you go to Church and State Doc, DOC, short for documentary, churchandstatedoc.com, that has all the free ways you can watch it. It's on YouTube. It's on a few other platforms. And if you want to watch it ad free, it's on Vimeo for $5 to rent. But yeah, so that's where you could find it.
All right. Well, thanks again, Andrew. I really enjoyed having you on. This was very good. It's important to see this perspective of what church and state means when it comes to separation, and to see it historically through essentially the person who was the originator of that in America. So thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And maybe down the road, we'll have you on about, you said there was another documentary and any of the future work that you're doing. So we'll keep in touch. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So remember, there's the website, johnchristie.com. You can find out all the information about Angels as it's coming out. As well, you can listen to this podcast or find channels through it, and follow me on Substack. Take care.
Like what you hear? Hate what you hear? Have some thoughts you'd like to get off your chest? We want to hear from you. Contact us at johnchristie.com and be a guest.